She posted the photo at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, and by noon the entire world had already decided how the story would end. The selfie was calculated down to the last pixel. Viviana Marchetti stood in the master bedroom of the Bellacourt estate. His bedroom, their bedroom, wearing nothing but a silk robe that clearly didn't belong to her, holding a glass of champagne, and smiling the kind of smile that said, "I won, she lost, and I want everyone to know it." The caption read, "Some women build empires, others just live in them." Within 40 minutes, it had 4 million views. Within 2 hours, Saraphina Bellacourt's name was trending in 7 countries. And somewhere in Milan, in a private office no one knew she kept, Saraphina set down her coffee, opened the notification, studied the photograph for exactly 11 seconds, and smiled. Not the smile of a woman who had just been humiliated. The smile of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the story you're about to hear is one of the most jaw-dropping, slow-burn takedowns I have ever brought to this channel. And trust me, it only gets more intense from here. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I read every single one, and I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get into it. The photograph appeared on Saraphina's phone at 11:49 a.m., 2 minutes after the rest of the world had already seen it. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Julia, who had worked with her for 6 years and knew better than to panic out loud, texted her a single line. "It's everywhere. Do you need me to call anyone?" Saraphina typed back, "No, cancel my 2 o'clock. I'll call you before 3. Then she locked her phone, walked to the window of her private office on the 4th floor of the Bellacourt Group's legitimate holdings building in central Milan, and looked out at the city she had helped build into something real. The city that didn't know her name because Lorenzo's was always the one on the letterhead. The city that was currently lighting up with notifications about her husband's affair, her humiliation, and the beautiful woman standing in her bedroom like she owned the floor beneath her feet. Saraphina was 44 years old. She had given 21 of those years to a man who was brilliant in the way that certain dangerous men are, charismatic, decisive, capable of walking into a room and making everyone in it feel like they had been waiting for him specifically. She had loved him the way you love someone who is also, quietly, the most difficult person you have ever known. Not without reservation, not without cost, but fully, the way you only love people when you're still young enough to believe that love is enough to make complicated things simple. She had been wrong about that, but she had learned other things in exchange. She picked up her phone again and opened the photograph. The bedroom was easy to identify. The light through those particular windows had a quality she had always noticed, golden in the morning, flat by early afternoon. The photo was taken around 10 o'clock, based on the angle. Lorenzo had told her he had an early meeting in Rome. He had kissed her cheek at 6:45 a.m. in their kitchen, in front of their children, and said he'd be back by Thursday. That was 4 days ago. She studied Viviana Marchetti's face. The woman was 31, gorgeous in a way that required significant effort to sustain, and had appeared in Lorenzo's orbit approximately 8 months ago through what had been presented as a charity gala connection. She had a lifestyle platform with 4 million followers, a talent for being photographed in expensive places, and a smile that Saraphina had clocked the first time she saw it at that gala as belonging to someone who was always calculating something. She had thought, Lorenzo will find her interesting for about 6 weeks. She had been wrong about the timeline. She was willing to admit that. What Viviana did not know, what Lorenzo did not know, was that Saraphina had begun watching Viviana Marchetti within 3 weeks of her appearance in their lives. Not out of jealousy, out of instinct. Something about the woman had tripped a wire that Saraphina had learned, over 2 decades married to a man who operated in dangerous spaces, to trust absolutely. She pulled up a second file on her laptop. It had been sitting in a folder labeled Renovation Quotes, Guest Rooms, which was the kind of title that no one ever clicks on. It was 47 pages long. It contained financial records, communication intercepts she had obtained through channels she would never fully explain, travel logs, a series of property transactions, and a documented relationship, going back 19 months, which was 5 months before Viviana had even met Lorenzo, between Viviana Marchetti and a man named Damiano Ferraro. Damiano Ferraro, who ran the second largest criminal organization in northern Italy. Damiano Ferraro, who had been trying to destroy the Bellicore Empire for 6 years. Saraphina looked at the selfie one more time. "Some women build empires," the caption said. "I did," Saraphina said quietly, to no one. "I literally did." She closed the photo, opened her calendar, and began rescheduling her week. The first call she made was to her children's school. Matteo was 16 and would understand something was wrong, but wouldn't ask directly. He had his father's instinct for reading rooms and his mother's restraint about showing it. Elisa was 12 and would ask everything and need a real answer. Saraphina spoke to the headmaster personally, citing a family situation, and arranged for both children to be kept on campus through the weekend under the supervision of a security detail she had maintained independently of Lorenzo's people for the past 14 months. Nobody on Lorenzo's team knew about her security detail. She had built it quietly, through a retired Carabinieri commander she trusted, paying for it out of a fund she had established 3 years ago when she had first begun to feel the particular loneliness of a woman whose husband had started looking through her rather than at her. She didn't blame him entirely for that. She had never been easy to know. But there is a difference between someone who is hard to know and someone who stops trying to know you, and Lorenzo had crossed that line without ever seeming to notice he had done it. The second call was to her personal attorney, a woman named Concetta Albano, who had offices in both Milan and Zurich, and who had been holding a very specific set of sealed documents on Saraphina's behalf for the past 11 weeks. "You saw it," Concetta said without preamble. "I saw it. Do you want me to move on the filing?" "Not yet. Give me 72 hours. Saraphina, Concetta, I've been building this for 14 months. I'm not going to rush the last 3 days of it because a 31-year-old influencer wanted to feel like she won something." She paused. "How does the document look?" "Airtight," Concetta said. "I had 2 independent attorneys review it. Both said they had never seen a more comprehensively documented private investigation." "Good." Saraphina pulled up a fresh document on her laptop and began typing. "I'll call you tonight." She hung up and sat for a moment in the particular silence of a woman who has just made a decision that cannot be unmade. Then she got back to work. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Saraphina had done 4 things that no one would learn about for several days. She had transferred operational authority over the Bellicore Group's 3 largest legitimate business divisions into a holding structure that placed her as sole executive director, a legal maneuver she had been quietly positioning for 8 months, which required only her signature because Lorenzo, 6 years ago, had trusted her completely enough to grant her that authority, and had never thought to revisit it. She had contacted a private financial forensics firm and authorized them to begin a formal audit of 3 subsidiary accounts that she had flagged as showing unusual outflow patterns over the past 11 months. She had forwarded a condensed version of her 47-page file to a contact she had inside the Financial Crimes Division of the National Police. Not an official report, not yet, just a quiet notification that something was coming and that when it arrived, it would be complete. And she had written a single text message to Lorenzo, which she sent at 2:17 p.m., and which read, "Come home, not for what you think. Come home because I need to speak with you, and it cannot wait. The children are safe. I am fine. This is not an emotional conversation. Come home." Lorenzo read it. She could see the check marks, and did not respond for 6 minutes. Then, "I'll be there by 8. Saraphina set down her phone and noticed, with some distant curiosity, that her hands were completely steady. She thought about this version of herself that might have cracked. There had been a version of her, maybe 10 years ago, 15, who would have sat in that bathroom and cried until she couldn't breathe. Who would have called her sister in Naples and sobbed on the phone. Who would have done what the world was currently waiting for her to do. Fall apart publicly, make statements through tears, be the dignified victim in a story about a powerful man's betrayal. She had been that woman once, in smaller ways. When Lorenzo had forgotten their 10th anniversary because of a deal in Frankfurt, when he had publicly credited a male associate for a restructuring plan that had been entirely hers, when she had mentioned wanting to start her own creative consultancy, something she had been thinking about for years, and he had nodded the way people nod when they are not actually listening, and the conversation had simply moved on. She had cried about those things, in private, where no one could see. But somewhere over the past 4 or 5 years, something in her had shifted. Not hardened, exactly. She didn't think of herself as hard. She thought of herself as someone who had finally gotten honest about what her life actually was, versus what she had once hoped it would be. And instead of letting that honesty break her, she had let it clarify her. She had started working differently, more carefully, more independently. She had stopped waiting for Lorenzo to notice what she was contributing and had started simply building things, real things, documented things, things that bore her name in places he couldn't see. She had started maintaining her own relationships outside their shared world, her own accounts, her own advisors. She had told herself it was just good sense, that any intelligent woman in her position should have her own infrastructure. She hadn't admitted, until 14 months ago when she had first clocked Viviana's connection to Ferraro, that she had been quietly preparing for the possibility that Lorenzo's world might one day try to swallow her whole. It had not swallowed her. It had, in fact, handed her something she had spent over a year trying to find the right moment to use. Lorenzo arrived at the estate at 7:48. She heard his car in the drive and stayed in the study, where she had set up 2 chairs facing each other and put a glass of water on the table beside each one. No wine, no dinner. She did not want him comfortable, but she did not want this to be a confrontation that lived on adrenaline either. She heard him in the hallway, heard him stop. He would be noticing that the house was quiet, that the children weren't there. He would be feeling the specific quality of silence that settles into a house when the people in it are about to have a conversation that changes things. He knocked on the study door. "Come in," she said. He looked, she had to be honest with herself, terrible. Not in a physical sense. Lorenzo Bellicourt was 51 and still carried himself like a man 10 years younger, broad and controlled, the kind of man who dressed well without appearing to think about it. But his face, when he came through that door, had the look of a person who has been driving for hours inside their own guilt and has arrived somewhere they don't know how to enter. "Saraphina," he said. "Sit down, Lorenzo." He sat. He looked at the glass of water. He did not touch it. "The children are fine. They're at school. They'll be there through the weekend. I made arrangements." "You made—" He stopped. "Okay. Before you say anything," she said, "I need you to understand something. This conversation is not about what you think it's about. You're going to hear some things tonight that are going to be difficult to process. I need you to process them quietly, without interrupting, and without making this about your feelings until I have finished speaking. Can you do that?" Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. The beginning of what she recognized as genuine fear, which was different from guilt and different from shame, and was the first real thing she had seen on his face in a very long time. "Yes," he said. "Viviana Marchetti," Saraphina said, "has been employed by Damiano Ferraro for 19 months. She was placed in your vicinity deliberately at the gala last spring as part of a longer operational strategy designed to compromise your judgment, access your business information, and position Ferraro to take control of 3 specific legitimate holdings during a window of personal and legal vulnerability." Lorenzo's face went completely still. "The affair," Saraphina continued, "was not incidental. It was the mechanism. While you were distracted, while you were feeling guilty, while you were managing the emotional complexity of a secret, she was feeding information to Ferraro's financial network. I have documented 11 separate instances. The most recent occurred 9 days ago." "Saraphina," I said, "don't interrupt." He closed his mouth. She reached to the side table and picked up a manila folder she had prepared that afternoon. A condensed version of the 47 pages, the things he needed to see first. She held it out to him. He took it with hands that were not quite steady. She watched him open it, watched his eyes move across the first page, watched him go to the second, the third. She had spent 14 months building that file. She had been methodical, and she had been thorough, and she had been, in certain moments alone in her office late at night, absolutely furious. Not only about the betrayal, which had cut her in ways she was not prepared to fully catalog yet, but about the arrogance of it, the assumption that she would not see. The assumption that she was a decoration in a house rather than the architect of it. "She's Ferraro's operative," Lorenzo said. His voice was flat in a way that meant he was trying to hold himself together. "Yes. For 19 months. 19 months. He set the folder down on his knee and stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at her, and his face had crossed from fear into something raw that she didn't have a clean name for. "How long have you known?" he asked. "About Ferraro's connection to her?" 14 months. The silence that followed was the longest one of their marriage. "You've known for 14 months, he said slowly, that the woman I was—" He stopped. "That the woman you were sleeping with was an enemy operative." "Yes." "And you didn't—" He stopped again. "Why didn't you tell me?" Saraphina looked at him. She had thought about this question. She had prepared for it. She had known it was coming. "Because," she said, "I needed time to finish building the documentation. Because if I had told you 14 months ago, you would have confronted her immediately, out of emotion, and Ferraro would have pulled her out before we had enough to use. And because—" She paused. This was the part she had not rehearsed. "Because by the time I knew about Ferraro, you had already been lying to me for 3 months, Lorenzo. And I was not ready to hand you information that would let you fix your problem before I understood what my problem actually was." He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it. "That's fair," he said quietly. It was the last thing she had expected him to say, and for a single, unguarded moment, it cracked something in her that she had not meant to let crack. She pressed her hand flat against her thigh under the table, where he couldn't see it, and breathed steadily through her nose. "I know it is," she said. Outside, the city hummed along, indifferent and continuous, and Viviana Marchetti's selfie was still collecting views somewhere in the vast and careless machinery of the internet. Somewhere, people were forming opinions about Saraphina Bellicourt, deciding what kind of woman she was, what she deserved, whether she would survive this. She pressed her hand flat against her thigh and breathed. She was already 3 moves ahead of the question. Lorenzo sat with that folder on his knee for a long time, not reading it anymore, just sitting with the weight of it. The way a man sits with something he knows has permanently rearranged the architecture of his understanding. The pages had stopped being pages somewhere around the 4th or 5th one and had become instead a kind of verdict, handed down not by a court, but by the one person in his life who had never once needed to raise her voice to make him feel small. Saraphina watched him without expression. She had learned that from years of sitting across tables from men who were used to reading women's faces for leverage, and she had long ago trained herself to give them nothing to read. Finally, Lorenzo set the folder on the side table. "The account transfers," he said, "the ones on page 9. 11 instances of outflow routed through a shell entity registered in Malta. The beneficial owner traces back to a Ferraro subsidiary through 2 intermediary layers. My forensics firm completed the mapping 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks, he repeated. "I was waiting for the 11th transaction. I needed the pattern to be unambiguous." He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture so familiar to her that it produced a specific, unwanted ache somewhere behind her sternum. She had watched him do that at kitchen tables and boardroom tables, and once, memorably, in a hospital waiting room when Matteo was 7 and had broken his arm falling out of a tree, and Lorenzo had sat beside her with his face in his hands for 20 minutes, pretending he was not afraid. She did not let herself linger on that. "How much did she take?" he asked. "The direct outflows total approximately 2.3 million euros. But that's not the real number, Lorenzo. The real damage is what she was positioned to enable. If Ferraro had moved when he planned to, and based on what I found, he was planning to move in the next 60 days. The exposure to the Castellano holdings alone would have been catastrophic. We're talking potential forced liquidation." Lorenzo went very still. The Castellano holdings were the legitimate crown of everything they had built. 14 years of work, hotels, a logistics network, a cultural foundation that Saraphina had personally structured and fought for, and which was the thing she was most quietly proud of in the world. "I was going to take the Castellano portfolio," Lorenzo said. It wasn't a question. "He was going to manufacture the conditions to force a distressed sale, with you emotionally compromised, legally exposed if the affair became public, and with a trusted insider already embedded. Yes, he had a buyer lined up. I found the preliminary term sheet." Something crossed Lorenzo's face that she had seen only a handful of times in their marriage. It was not anger. It was the controlled, cold settling of a man who has just understood that he has been played, completely, and that his own weakness was the instrument. It frightened her slightly, even now. Not because it was directed at her, but because she had spent 21 years knowing what that face meant for whoever it was directed at. Where is she now? He asked. Her phone is in Monaco. Whether she's there in person, I can't confirm. She checked out of the estate. Saraphina paused, noting the slight tightening around his eyes at the word estate. 3 days ago. My guess is Ferraro pulled her back once the selfie went up. She posted that without his authorization. Saraphina tilted her head. What makes you say that? Because it's sloppy, Lorenzo said flatly. Ferraro doesn't do sloppy. That photo blows her cover, puts her face in international media, and makes everything traceable. If he authorized that, he's gotten stupid. He paused. He hasn't gotten stupid. No, Saraphina agreed. My read is the same. She went off script. She wanted the moment. She wanted the world to see her win something, and she didn't wait for permission. She looked at him steadily. Which is, in the end, the thing that gave us our opening. Lorenzo looked at her. There it was. That word, us, floating in the room between them, complicated and loaded and almost unbearably sad. Saraphina. Not yet, she said quietly. We're not there yet. First we handle this. Then we talk about everything else. He nodded, and she could see the effort it cost him to defer the conversation he clearly needed to have. And she felt briefly the exhaustion of being the person in the room who always had to be more organized than her own grief. She made him tea, because it was 11 o'clock, and they were both past the point where alcohol would help anything, and because the act of doing something with her hands gave her somewhere to put the parts of herself she was not currently using. She did not make it the way she might have on an ordinary night. She didn't ask how he wanted it. She made it the way he had always taken it. Strong, no sugar, a small amount of milk. Because 21 years of marriage meant that some things lived in your hands independently of how you felt about the person. She set it in front of him without comment. He wrapped both hands around the mug and for a moment looked, just briefly, like a man who was 51 years old and had made too many wrong turns to easily count, and was only now beginning to understand the full map of them. She sat back down. The executive authority transfer, he said. He had been thinking while she made tea. She could always tell. The holding restructure. Completed this afternoon. Your sole director. Effective as of 4:15 p.m. Yes. He looked at his tea. Was that protection or leverage? She gave him credit for asking it that directly. A lesser man would have made it an accusation. Both, she said. Primarily protection. If Ferraro has people inside our legal team, which I suspect but cannot yet prove, I needed the authority structure clean before this became public. And if I'd come home tonight and refused to cooperate, then it would have remained leverage. He absorbed this with a slow exhale. You've been building a parallel infrastructure for over a year. Yes, without telling me. You were sleeping with an enemy operative, Lorenzo. No, I did not tell you. The words landed and stayed. He didn't flinch from them, which she noted. He took a long drink of his tea and set the mug down and looked at her with the directness that she had once found so compelling and had learned over years to be cautious of, because directness without accountability was just another form of pressure. Tell me what you need from me for the next 72 hours, he said. It was, she thought, the right question. It was the question she needed him to ask, and not the one she'd been preparing to fight through. And that was the particular cruelty of Lorenzo Bellicore, that he was most capable of being exactly what you needed from him, precisely when you had already paid the full price for his not being it sooner. She picked up her own folder, the real one, not the condensed version. Sit up, she said. This is going to take a while. They worked through the night, not together, exactly. There was nothing easy or warm about the hours between midnight and 4 in the morning when they sat at the long table in the study and went through 14 months of documentation with the focused efficiency of two people who had once built a legitimate empire from a dining room table in a rented apartment and had never fully lost the muscle memory of working in the same direction. Lorenzo asked precise questions. He was, whatever his failures as a husband, extraordinary at this, at absorbing complex information, identifying pressure points, seeing the structural logic of a problem. She had always known that about him. It was one of the things she had loved earliest and most reliably. She answered precisely. She did not soften anything. When the documentation showed moments where Lorenzo's own decisions, his complacency, his distraction, his willingness to let Viviana into spaces that should have been protected, had created the vulnerabilities Ferraro exploited, she said so plainly. He accepted it without arguing. At 2:15 a.m., his phone lit up on the table between them. They both looked at it. The name on the screen was V. Saraphina looked at the phone, then at Lorenzo, then back at the phone. "Answer it," she said. "Saraphina, answer it. Put it on speaker. Don't tell her I'm here." Her voice was completely even. "This is an intelligence conversation, Lorenzo. Don't make it personal." He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he picked up the phone. "Viviana," he said. His voice was steady, which she gave him credit for. The voice that came through the speaker was not the polished, performative voice of Viviana Marchetti's public persona. It was thinner, faster, with an edge underneath it that sounded like someone who had spent the last several hours realizing that a decision they made could not be undone. "Are you home?" she asked. "Yes." "Is she there?" "I'm at the estate, yes." A pause. "Lorenzo, I need you to understand. The photo was a mistake. I was angry. I wasn't thinking. It wasn't supposed to." "Viviana." His voice was careful. "What did you need to tell me?" Another pause, longer this time. Saraphina could hear something in the background of the call. Not traffic, not interior noise. Something more open. Wind, possibly. "I'm in a difficult position," Viviana said. "Some people are not happy with what happened today. I need—" She stopped. "I need to know where things stand with you." "Things stand however they stand," Lorenzo said. "That's not an answer." "I know." His voice was flat, but not unkind, which was exactly the register Saraphina would have chosen, cold enough to give nothing, warm enough to keep her talking. "What do you actually need, Viviana? Not the framing. What do you need?" A silence. The wind on the other end of the call, or whatever it was, picked up slightly. "I need to know," Viviana said, "whether you're going to handle this the way I think you're going to handle it, or whether there's another option." "What other option do you have in mind?" "Lorenzo." Her voice dropped. "I'm not the only one who knows things. You understand that, right? There are things I could say publicly about how your business operates, about certain relationships I observed during—" She paused. "During our time together." Seraphina's jaw tightened just slightly, in a way no one was there to see. Lorenzo's expression did not change. "Are you threatening me?" he asked. Still that same careful flatness. "I'm telling you that I'm not without options, and I would prefer that we both—" "Viviana." His voice changed, just fractionally. "Stop. Think about what you're doing right now. Think about who you might be calling on behalf of, and whether the advice you've been given about this call has your interests at its center. Think carefully." A pause. "Then call me back if you still want to have this conversation." Silence. Then the call ended. Lorenzo set the phone face down on the table. Neither of them spoke for a moment. "She's rattled," Saraphina said. "She's scared." He rubbed the back of his neck. "And she's not calling on her own initiative. That conversation was structured. Someone told her what to say. Ferraro's testing whether you'll panic." "Yes." "He doesn't know about the documentation." "No, if he did, this call would have been very different." Lorenzo looked at her. "He still thinks this is just a domestic situation. He thinks I'm home dealing with an angry wife and a PR problem." "Which means we have a window," Saraphina said. "How long?" "Days, maybe less, if Viviana tells him more than she should." She opened her laptop. "Which is why the next move has to happen before he recalibrates." Dawn found them still at the table, with cold tea and a legal pad that Saraphina had filled with her precise, compressed handwriting. Not notes exactly, but the structure of a sequence of actions, ordered and timed and dependent on each other, with the kind of internal logic that lawyers and engineers, and people who had spent decades building things from the ground up recognized immediately. Lorenzo had stopped talking much around 4 a.m., not because he had withdrawn, but because he was in that mode she knew from the early years, the mode where he was processing something large and staying very still while he did it, like water going cold. He looked at her across the table. "I know this isn't the time," he said. Lorenzo. "I know. I just need to say one thing, not about the situation." He paused. "I need to say that I know what I did. Not just the affair. All of it. The years of all of it. And I know that saying it right now sounds like a man trying to save himself. I know how it sounds." His voice was low and rough in a way she associated with the version of him she had married. The version before everything had gotten complicated and layered and professionally managed. I just don't want you to think that I don't know. Saraphina looked at him for a long time. I know you know, she said finally. That's the part that always made it harder, Lorenzo, not easier. He nodded, didn't push it further. She gave him credit for that too. She turned back to her legal pad. Julia arrived at the office building at 7:30 a.m. and found Saraphina already at her desk, changed, composed. The kind of composed that takes years of practice to produce convincingly. The press is outside the estate, Julia said, setting down coffee. Approximately 40 journalists. Several European outlets, 2 American networks. One anchor is doing a live piece on the sidewalk. Let them stay there. I won't be at the estate today. Where will you be? Here. I have 3 calls this morning and a board notification to prepare. She looked up. I also need you to reach out to Martina Caldesi at RAI. Julia blinked. Martina Caldesi was the most respected investigative journalist in Italian television. She had broken 2 major financial corruption stories in the past 5 years and was widely understood to be untouchable by the kind of institutional pressure that made other journalists nervous. When do you want her? Julia asked. By end of week, Saraphina said. Tell her I have documentation relevant to a story she has been trying to crack for 18 months. She'll know what that means. She said it without drama, the way she said most things, as if it were simply the next item on the list. Julia wrote it down without asking follow-up questions, which was why she had lasted 6 years. The call that mattered most came at 11:15 a.m. It came from a number she had saved in her phone under Rossi Hardware, which was not a hardware store. It was the personal line of Commissario Aldo Fenu, who ran the organized crime division of the National Financial Police, and who had been, for the past 14 months, the recipient of a series of anonymous financial tips of extraordinary quality and specificity that had quietly allowed his unit to build a case against Ferraro's legitimate side operations that was now, according to the condensed brief she had sent him 48 hours ago, within reach of a viable prosecution. I received your package, Fenu said. Good. This is significantly more than I expected. I know. Some of this, he paused. Some of this I will need to have authenticated before I can use it, but some of it I can move on now. The Malta account trail, she said. That's clean. The intermediary documentation is complete. You can move on that today if you need to. Yes. Another pause. The woman. The Marchetti woman. She's in Monaco, I believe, possibly mobile. We have people who can ask questions in Monaco. I know you do. A silence. You've been building this a long time, Fenu said. Not an accusation. Something closer to professional respect, which she found she was able to receive without false modesty. Yes, she said. Can I ask? He stopped. Never mind. Go ahead. Can I ask why you didn't come to us sooner? Saraphina looked at the view from her office window. The city was bright today, clear and hard-edged in the early autumn light. Because coming to you sooner would have been enough to stop one operation, she said. What I built is enough to end the whole network, and I wanted it to be enough for that. Fenu was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. I'll be in touch before evening. She hung up and looked at her phone. Somewhere across the city, a press conference was being scheduled. She had learned about it through a source inside Viviana's management team, a young publicist who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the direction her client was taking, and who had sent, that morning, a cautious and carefully worded email to Julia that contained a single critical piece of information. Viviana Marchetti intended to hold a major televised statement at 4 p.m. on Friday at the Hotel Imperial, before every major European and Italian media outlet she could reach. The stated purpose was a response to what her team was calling a campaign of intimidation and defamation by the Bellicourt family. The actual purpose, Saraphina understood immediately, was to burn her to the ground on live television before Saraphina could move first. She sat with this information for about 90 seconds. Then she called Lorenzo. There's a press conference Friday, she said when he picked up. 4 o'clock, Hotel Imperiale. I heard. His voice told her he had his own sources in motion. She's going to name you directly. She's going to try to make me the story, position herself as the victim of a powerful family's revenge, probably imply I manufactured the Ferraro connection as a revenge narrative. She paused, which is actually a reasonably intelligent countermove. which she didn't come up with herself. No, Ferraro's people structured that. She picked up her pen. Lorenzo, I need you to do something difficult. A beat. Tell me. I need you to go to that press conference. A long silence. And do what? He said carefully. Not defend me, she said. Don't make it about defending me. Make it about what you actually know, what you found out, what happened to your business, your family, your people. Her voice was even and precise. She's walking into that room thinking you're going to be at this estate, managing damage, trying to keep me from leaving you. She is not prepared for you to be in that room. Another silence, longer. If I walk into that room, Lorenzo said, there is no way to control what happens after. I know, Saraphina said. It blows everything open. Ferraro, the police investigation, Viviana's cover, all of it becomes public. Whatever we manage after that point, we're managing in full view. Yes. And you want that? I want the truth to be uncontainable, she said. That's what I've spent 14 months building toward. Not a quiet settlement, not a managed exit, something that cannot be spun. Lorenzo was quiet for so long that she checked her phone screen to confirm the call was still active. Okay, he said finally. Okay? I'll be there. Friday, 4 o'clock. A pause. Saraphina, after this, whatever happens after this, I want to talk. Not about the business. About us. She pressed her hand flat against her thigh, under the desk, where no camera and no one could see it. After Friday, she said. One thing at a time. She ended the call. Outside her window, the city ran on, indifferent and relentless, carrying its noise and its traffic and its 10,000 private dramas forward without pause. Viviana Marchetti was somewhere preparing a speech that was designed to be the final word. Damiano Ferraro was somewhere recalibrating, not yet knowing what was already moving toward him. Lorenzo was somewhere sitting with the weight of a choice that had just become irrevocable. And Saraphina Bellicourt was at her desk, completely still, with 14 months of carefully documented truth sitting in servers and sealed envelopes in the hands of prosecutors and journalists, and a financial crimes division that was already preparing its next move. She was not triumphant. She was not peaceful. She was a woman standing at the edge of everything she had built, about to find out whether it was enough. And more than that, standing at the edge of a marriage that had survived things it probably shouldn't have, about to find out whether that was something she still wanted to try to save, or whether winning the external war was the last thing she intended to do inside a life she was finally going to remake entirely on her own terms. She opened her laptop. She had 3 hours before her next call and 14 months of work that needed to be exactly right before Friday, and a press conference that was going to change everything one way or another. And she had not slept, and her coffee was cold, and her hands were still completely steady. She began to type. The 3 days between that phone call and Friday afternoon were the longest of Saraphina's life, and she had lived through some long ones. She slept 4 hours a night, which was 2 fewer than she needed and 3 more than she expected. She ate meals she did not taste at a desk she did not leave for more than 20 minutes at a stretch. She spoke to Conchetta twice a day, to Fenu once, to Julia constantly, and to Lorenzo not at all. Not because they had agreed not to speak, but because there was nothing left to say that was not contained in the plan, and speaking outside the plan felt dangerous in a way she could not fully articulate. She spoke to her children on Wednesday evening. Matteo, careful and controlled, asked if they were coming home for the weekend. She told him not yet, soon, that things were complicated right now in a way that would be less complicated soon. He said okay in the voice he used when he was not okay, but had decided to manage it himself. And she felt the familiar guilt of raising a child so much in her image that she could not reach him when he was hurting because he hid the hurt exactly where she did. Elisa asked directly, "Is Papa in trouble?" "Yes," Saraphina said, "but he's handling it." "Are you?" "Am I what?" "In trouble." Saraphina was quiet for a second. "No, sweetheart, I'm not in trouble." "Okay," Elisa said, and Saraphina could hear that she believed it, and that small specific weight of being believed by her daughter sat with her for the rest of that night in a way she didn't entirely know what to do with. Thursday passed in a controlled acceleration of moving pieces. Fenu called at 6 p.m. to confirm that a warrant for financial records had been issued against 2 of Ferraro's shell entities. The forensics firm delivered a supplementary report that filled 3 additional gaps in the Malta account chain. Martina Caldesi's producer called Julia to confirm a meeting for Saturday morning, post-Friday, which was the correct sequence. Lorenzo's attorney called to confirm Lorenzo's attendance at the press conference and to ask, carefully, whether Saraphina intended to be present. "No," she told Julia to relay. "I will watch from here." She had set up a live feed in the small conference room adjacent to her office. 3 screens. She did not intend to be in that room when Viviana Marchetti opened her mouth, because she did not trust what her face would do, and she was not willing to let anyone in her office see her face do it. She went home Thursday night for the first time since Tuesday morning, not to the estate, but to the apartment she had quietly leased 18 months ago in a building in a different part of the city under her family name, not Bellecourt, the name she had been born with and had never legally changed even after the wedding, because some instinct in her 23-year-old self had understood even then that a woman should keep something that was only hers. She sat in that apartment for 2 hours. She did not turn on the television. She did not open her laptop. She made herself dinner from what was in the refrigerator, which was not much, and she ate it at the small table by the window and watched the lights of the city and tried, for the first time in weeks, to let herself feel the actual shape of what was happening to her. Not the strategy of it, not the documentation of it, the feeling of it. She had been married for 21 years. She had built something real with a man she had genuinely, fully loved, and that man had spent the last 8 months lying to her face over breakfast and dinner and in their bed, and before that had spent years slowly turning away from her in ways she had told herself were the natural settling of a long marriage, and which she now understood had been the slow erosion of a man who had stopped seeing her. She felt it for those 2 hours. Let it move through her without organizing it or categorizing it or using it for anything. Then she washed her dishes, brushed her teeth, and went to bed. She slept for 5 hours without dreaming. Friday arrived gray and cold, the way October sometimes came to Milan without warning. Not dramatic, just final, like a door being closed in another room. She was back at the office by 7. Julia arrived at 7:30 with coffee and the morning press summary, which was exactly as Saraphina expected. 17 major outlets running follow-up pieces on the original selfie story, most of them angled around Saraphina's continued silence. Several of them already previewing the 4 p.m. press conference, with a tone that made it clear the narrative being set up in advance was going to be unfavorable. One piece, in a Milan-based celebrity publication, described Saraphina as the iceberg wife who let the Titanic happen. She read that one twice, not because it hurt her, it didn't, or not in the way the writer intended, but because it was such a precise encapsulation of what people believed about her, and she filed it away in the place she kept things that were useful to understand. At 9 a.m., she received the first indication that something had gone wrong. It came as a text from a number she did not recognize, which she almost did not open, except that the first 3 words visible in the preview were enough to make her stomach drop with a cold, immediate precision. They found that... She opened the full message. They found the apartment. Someone talked. Get out of the digital files. Now. She stared at the message for 4 seconds. Then she called Julia into the room and told her to close the door. Someone has accessed the apartment, she said, keeping her voice completely level. Not the estate. The Conti Street apartment. Julia's face went careful. When? I don't know. Last night, possibly. This morning. She pulled up her laptop. I need you to call the building manager personally. Don't use your office phone. Use your personal cell. Ask if anyone came to the building asking about the 4th floor unit in the last 48 hours. Should I? Go now, Saraphina said. Not harshly, but immediately. Julia left. Saraphina's fingers moved across her keyboard. The digital files she kept that were most sensitive were not on any networked system. She had been meticulous about that, storing the primary documentation on 2 encrypted drives that lived in 2 separate physical locations, one of which was in Concetta's Zurich office, and one of which was in a safety deposit box at a bank in a name that was not Bellecourt and not Conti, and would require a level of forensic investigation to trace that she had believed was beyond Ferraro's current reach. She had believed. She pulled up the access log for the cloud-based organizational layer she used, not the documents themselves, but the index system she used to track and coordinate her document management. It was a second-order system, essentially invisible unless you knew it existed, and knowing it existed required knowing things about how she worked that almost no one knew. The log showed 2 access events from the night before. 2 successful logins at 11:42 p.m. and again at 2:09 a.m. The IP address on both events resolved to a VPN exit node in Lisbon. She sat back in her chair. Someone who knew the system existed, knew the login credentials, and had the technical sophistication to route the access through a foreign exit node had been inside her organizational files for, she checked the timestamps, a total of 41 minutes across the 2 sessions. They could not have accessed the documents themselves. The encrypted drives were offline. But the index, the map of what she had, where it was organized, what categories it contained, how the documentation was structured, that was visible. Whoever it was now knew the shape of what she had built. Not the contents, the shape. Which meant they knew she had something on the Malta accounts, on the Ferraro connection, on Viviana's timeline. They knew the categories existed even if they couldn't read the files. Which meant Ferraro now knew that Saraphina's documentation was real, was comprehensive, and was organized specifically to be used. Which meant the press conference this afternoon was no longer what it had appeared to be. Her phone rang. It was Concetta. "Tell me you're looking at your access logs," Concetta said, without greeting. "Already there." Lisbon node, 2 sessions. Conchetta's voice was tight in a way Saraphina had almost never heard. "Saraphina, I need to tell you something. The Zurich copy." Saraphina's hand tightened on the phone. "What about the Zurich copy?" "My office was accessed Wednesday night. Physical access. Someone entered the office. My security system shows a 37-minute gap in the camera feed starting at 1:15 a.m., which means professional suppression, not a technical failure." Concetta paused. "I found the safe in the secondary room tampered with. The drive is still there. They didn't take it, but they had access to it for up to 37 minutes. Saraphina closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. "They copied it," she said. "I don't know. It's possible. If they had the right equipment and they knew what they were looking for." "They knew what they were looking for, Concetta. Someone told them where to look." A silence. "Who knew about the Zurich copy?" Concetta asked carefully. "You," Saraphina said. "Me. And one other person." The silence that followed was the particular kind that forms around a name no one wants to say. "Saraphina," Concetta said. "I know." "Is it possible that—" "I said I know." Her voice was completely flat. "I'll call you back." She set her phone down on the desk. She breathed. There was one other person who had known about the Zurich office. One other person she had told, because she had believed, because she had made the decision on Tuesday night across that study table to believe that working together toward the same goal meant they were, temporarily at minimum, on the same side. Lorenzo. She had told Lorenzo about the Zurich copy at 2 a.m. on Wednesday morning. She had told him because he had asked, directly, whether the documentation was physically protected, and she had answered honestly because that was what she had committed to in that room. Full transparency. Working together. One thing at a time. She looked at her hands. Her hands were not steady. She pressed them flat on the desk and looked at them until they were. She did not call Lorenzo. She called Fenu. "I have a problem," she said when he picked up. "I know," he said, which meant his people were already watching something she wasn't. "Where are you?" "My office." "Stay there. Don't move any files. Don't call your husband." A pause that landed like a stone in still water. "Do you understand what I just said?" "Yes," she said. "We've been running surveillance on 3 of Ferraro's communication lines since Wednesday. This morning at 6:47, one of those lines received a call that lasted 11 minutes. The voice on our end of the line belonged to a man we've been trying to identify for 8 months. Another pause. "We identified him this morning." Her mouth was dry. "Who?" she asked. "The call originated from a cell tower in the Navigli district," Fenu said. "At the time of the call, we have Lorenzo Bellicourt's vehicle parked 2 blocks from that tower." She heard the words. She understood them. She sat with them for a moment that felt much longer than it was. "That's not proof," she said. Her voice was still even. She was aware, distantly, that maintaining this evenness was costing her something she could not currently calculate. "No," Fenu said. "It's proximity and timing. It's not proof. But Saraphina..." He used her first name, which he had never done before. The voice on the call to Ferraro's line referenced a document structure. He used the phrase 47 pages. That's a specific number. She had told Lorenzo at the very beginning of Tuesday night that her investigation file was 47 pages long. She had said it without thinking. It was such a specific, unremarkable detail. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "I need you to stay exactly where you are and not tip your hand before 4 o'clock. The press conference is still going to happen, and if Ferraro thinks his play has worked, he'll let it happen. We need him to think that." Fenu's voice was steady and professional. "Can you do that?" She looked at the window. The city was gray and cold and running on beneath her without any awareness of or interest in the fact that the ground had just shifted completely beneath everything she thought she knew. "Yes," she said. "Good. I'll have people outside your building within the hour." He ended the call. Saraphina sat in her chair for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the small attached bathroom, ran cold water over her wrists for 30 seconds, and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked the same as she always did. Same face, same posture. Her eyes were slightly too bright, which she managed by pressing 2 fingers lightly to each lid for 10 seconds. She walked back to her desk. She had 4 hours until the press conference. She had a husband who may have given her entire operational structure to the man trying to destroy them. She had an attorney in Zurich with a potentially compromised drive. She had a file that Ferraro now understood the shape of, even if he didn't yet have its full contents. And she had one thing that she had not told Lorenzo about. One thing she had kept back instinctively, without fully knowing why, that Tuesday night when she had otherwise been completely transparent, a single piece of documentation that she had not included in the manila folder, that she had not mentioned in the work session that followed, that she had quietly omitted with the professional discipline of someone who had learned, somewhere in 14 months of building something in secret, to always keep one card that nobody knew about. A direct communication, not financial, not logistical, but personal, between Viviana Marchetti and Damiano Ferraro, recovered through a source she had never disclosed even to Concetta, in which Viviana described, in her own words, the precise goal of her operation: to manufacture a public crisis inside the Bellicourt marriage, use the resulting chaos to force a board-level power vacuum, and deliver controlling interest in the Castellano holdings to Ferraro's network within 90 days. The message was dated 7 months ago. It was in Viviana's voice. Specific, operational, unmistakable. Saraphina had kept it back because she had not yet determined the safest way to deploy it. She had kept it back because part of her had known, even Tuesday night, that giving a man who had been lying to her for 8 months, your complete hand was not strategy. It was hope dressed up as strategy. She had kept it back because she was Saraphina Bellicourt, and she had learned a very long time ago that you always kept one thing that was only yours. She opened the encrypted folder on the device she kept in a drawer in this office, a device she had told no one about, on a system connected to no network that anyone in her life had touched. The message was still there. She read it once. Then she picked up her phone and called a number she had memorized and never stored. "I need a favor," she said when the line connected. "An urgent one. I need a file transmitted to 3 separate recipients simultaneously at 3:58 p.m. today. Not before. Exactly 3:58. "Who are the recipients?" the voice on the other end asked. "Commissario Fenu, Martina Caldesi, and the general inbox of the Hotel Imperial press room." A pause. "That's specific?" "Yes." "What's in the file?" "The end of this," she said. The press conference began at 4 p.m. exactly. Saraphina watched it on the 3 screens in her conference room. Julia stood behind her. Neither of them sat down. The Hotel Imperiale's main ballroom had been arranged with professional precision: backdrop, lighting, a cluster of microphones on a low podium, rows of journalists who represented more accumulated media reach than most governments could command on short notice. It was, she noted, a better organized event than it should have been for something assembled in 4 days, which confirmed that Ferraro's people had been planning this for considerably longer than the selfie's timing suggested. Viviana Marchetti entered at 4:02, in a black dress that managed to be both grieving and defiant, flanked by 2 publicists and a legal representative. She looked, Saraphina thought, genuinely beautiful, in the way that certain very frightened people become beautiful. All of their complexity visible for a moment because the performance has broken slightly under the pressure. She began speaking at 4:04. The statement was structured, composed, delivered with the calibrated emotion of someone who had rehearsed it many times. She described herself as a private individual whose personal life had been weaponized. She described the Bellicourt family as using institutional power to intimidate and defame. She did not name Saraphina directly for the first 3 minutes, which Saraphina noted was designed to build anticipation. When she finally did, the room sharpened. She described Saraphina as the architect of a campaign to fabricate criminal connections and destroy a private citizen's reputation in order to protect a powerful family from scrutiny. She used the word fabricate 3 times. She said she had documentation of her own. Saraphina watched her own face on the screen in the small monitor showing the live social media reaction alongside the feed, because several outlets were cutting to file photos of her while Viviana spoke, and noticed that the internet was doing what the internet does: dividing, accelerating, amplifying. The ratio of responses had been tilted against her since Tuesday. Viviana had spent 4 days shaping that ratio. At 4:11, the door of the ballroom opened. Lorenzo Bellicourt walked in. Saraphina had known he was coming. She had planned for him to come. And yet watching him cross that room, watching the moment the cameras swung to him, watching the journalist turn, watching Viviana's composure fracture across every screen at once, she felt something that was not triumph and not relief, and was not any of the things she had expected to feel. It felt more than anything like watching someone she had loved for a very long time walk into the last room they would ever share. Lorenzo did not go to the podium. He stopped approximately 12 feet from it, in the space between the front row of journalists and the backdrop, and he stood there with the particular stillness of a man who has decided to stop managing the situation and simply be present in it. He looked at Viviana. "Tell them the truth about who you work for," he said. Not a shout, not a performance, just his voice, in a room that had gone so quiet that the microphones picked it up without effort and sent it to every screen and speaker connected to the feed. Viviana stared at him. "I don't know what you mean," she said. Her voice was steady. Saraphina noted that. It was steady. Better than she'd expected. "Damiano Ferraro," Lorenzo said. "Tell them how long you've been on his payroll. Tell them what the Castellano holdings were worth to him. Tell them what you were supposed to deliver and when." A pause of about 4 seconds that Saraphina would later describe to Conchetta as the longest pause she had ever watched in real time. Then Viviana made the mistake. It was small. It was the kind of mistake that a person makes when they have been caught, genuinely caught, and their preparation has not included a plan for this specific version of caught. She looked, just for a fraction of a second, maybe less, to her left, at the legal representative standing 3 feet away. It was not a meaningful look. There was no communication in it. It was the involuntary flicker of someone searching for help from the nearest person. But every camera in that room caught it. And in the press room of the Hotel Imperial, at 3:58 p.m., a file had arrived in the general inbox that Martina Caldisi's producer, already present, already waiting, had opened and read and was currently passing, in hard copy, to 3 journalists in the front row. A journalist in the second row, young, from a financial news network, who had clearly received the file from a colleague and had had 45 seconds to skim it, raised her hand. "Ms. Marchetti," she said, "can you characterize your relationship with Damiano Ferraro, specifically your communications with him dated 14 months ago regarding the Bellicourt Castellano portfolio?" The room went very still. Viviana's composure did not break, but it cracked. Saraphina could see it on the screen, the slight recalibration behind the eyes, the microsecond of understanding that the ground had moved, and she had not felt it move until just now. "I don't have any relationship with—" "We have a written communication," the journalist said, "in your name, describing a 90-day operational timeline." Viviana said nothing. The room erupted. Saraphina turned away from the screens. She did not need to watch the rest. She had watched enough. She knew exactly how it would proceed from this point. The cascade of questions, the legal representative's intervention, the moment when Viviana either held together or came apart. And either way, it didn't matter because the document was already in the hands of 3 journalists and Commissario Fenu and would be on every major financial and news platform within the hour. She stood at the window of her conference room with her back to the screens and breathed. Julia said, very quietly, "It worked." "Yes," Saraphina said. Then her phone rang. It was Fenu. "We have her," he said. "We're moving on the arrest within the hour. Financial crimes and conspiracy. The document you sent is clean. Our analysts confirmed it in 20 minutes. Combined with what we already had on the Malta chain, this is a complete case." "Good." Ferraro's people are already pulling back. We have 3 of his communication lines going dark simultaneously, which is exactly what they do when they're in damage control. A pause. "It's over on his end. He knows it. He'll find another way to come at us eventually," she said. "Eventually is not today. Today it's over." Fenu paused. "You did extraordinary work, Saraphina. The kind of thing that... I've been in this division for 19 years, and I'm telling you, I've never seen a private individual build a case at this level." She did not know what to do with that, so she said, "Thank you, Commissario." She hung up and stood at the window. She had won. She understood that. She could enumerate exactly what winning looked like from here. Viviana's arrest, Ferraro's operational retreat, the protection of everything she and Lorenzo had built, the vindication of 14 months of solitary, meticulous, exhausting work. She had won. And her husband had made a call from 2 blocks away from a Ferraro communication line at 6:47 in the morning 2 days ago for 11 minutes that she did not know the contents of, and that Fenu had not yet told her the full analysis of, and that she was not, she realized, standing at this window in this gray October afternoon, with the city going on beneath her as it always did, she was not going to be able to explain away. She pressed her forehead briefly against the cold glass of the window. Just for a moment, just that. Then she straightened, turned around, and picked up her phone to call her children, because whatever happened next, they needed to hear her voice, and she needed to hear theirs. And some things did not wait for the ground to stop moving. She called Matteo first. He answered on the second ring, and his voice, careful and controlled and so much like hers, was the first thing all week that made her eyes go briefly, privately, hot. "Mom," he said. "I know," she said. "I know, sweetheart. Listen." Matteo said very little during that call, which was its own kind of communication. He asked if she was safe. She said yes. He asked if he and Elisa were coming home soon. She said soon, not yet, a few more days. He asked, in the careful voice of a 16-year-old who has learned to approach dangerous things obliquely, "Is it Papa?" She did not lie to him. "There are some things your father and I need to work through," she said. "Adult things. Nothing that changes how he feels about you or Elisa." A silence. Then, "But things that change how you feel about him." She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose. "We're going to figure it out, Matteo." "That's not an answer." "I know it isn't. I'm sorry." Another silence, longer. Then, with the particular dignity of someone who has decided not to push further, "Okay, tell me when we can come home." "I will. I promise." She hung up and stood for a moment with the phone against her chest, in the empty conference room, with the screens behind her still running the press conference footage on mute. Viviana being escorted from the podium by her legal representative, the room in full controlled chaos. Lorenzo standing in the same spot he'd taken when he walked in, not moving, not speaking, just present. She turned and looked at him on the screen. He was looking directly at one of the cameras, not performing, not managing, just looking at it with an expression she recognized from the early years. The look of a man who has done something that cannot be undone and is making himself stay in the room with the consequence of it. She turned the screens off. She sat down in the nearest chair, and for exactly 4 minutes, did nothing at all. Lorenzo arrived at the office building at 6:15 p.m. She had not called him. She had not needed to. He had Julia's number, and Julia, to her credit, had asked Saraphina before giving him the floor and the room number. And Saraphina had said yes because running from this conversation was no longer something she had the architecture for. He looked worse than he had Tuesday night. The controlled, guilty composure of a man managing his remorse had been replaced by something rawer. He had spent 5 hours in that hotel with cameras and journalists and the cascading consequences of the afternoon, and it showed in the set of his jaw and the darkness under his eyes and the slight asymmetry of his posture, the way a person stands when they have been holding themselves together for a very long time and the effort has started to become visible. He came into the conference room and looked at the blank screens. "You watched," he said. "Yes." "Did it?" He stopped, started again. Did Fenu confirm the arrest? Yes. Within the hour after you walked in. She looked at him steadily. You did well in there. Exactly what was needed. Something moved across his face at that. Not gratitude, not relief. Something more complicated. He sat down in the chair across from her without being invited to, which she did not comment on. I need to tell you something, he said. I know you do. He looked at her. How much do you know? Tell me yourself, she said. Don't make me show you what I know first. Tell me yourself, Lorenzo. That matters. A long breath out. He put his elbows on his knees and his face briefly in his hands. That gesture, again, so familiar it was almost unbearable. And then he looked up. Wednesday morning, he said, after we finished working, after you went to make tea. The second time, around 4 a.m. He paused. I took a photograph of 3 pages from your documentation, with my phone. She said nothing. I told myself I was doing it to have a record, in case something happened to the physical copies. He kept his eyes on her. He did not look away, which she gave him credit for even as she felt the cold fury of it moving through her like water finding its level. I told myself that. And what was the real reason? I don't know, he said. That's the honest answer, and I know it's a terrible one. I don't know. I was scared, I think. I was sitting in that room at 4 a.m. with everything you'd built, and I felt how far behind I was, how completely you had managed everything without me. And I did something stupid and reactive, and I can't explain it better than that. You called Ferraro. The silence lasted about 2 seconds. No, he said. Your vehicle was placed 2 blocks from a Ferraro communication tower at 6:47 yesterday morning, Lorenzo. An 11-minute call was made from that location to a line his network uses. The caller referenced a 47-page document. His face had gone completely still. I told you the file was 47 pages on Tuesday night, she said. In this conversation, that was the only time I said that number out loud. Saraphina. His voice had changed. I did not call Ferraro. I need you to believe that. Give me a reason to. Because I was in Navigli Wednesday morning at 6:47, he said. I was there. I'm not going to lie about the location. I drove there after I left here because I couldn't sleep, and I needed to move, and I drive when I can't sleep. You know that. He held her gaze with the directness that had always been his most effective and most dangerous quality. But I did not make that call. Someone else did. Someone who knew my vehicle would be in that location. She looked at him. Her training, not formal training, but the accumulated instinct of 14 months of building a case on evidence and patterns, said, evaluate the claim against what you know. Don't accept it because you want to. Don't reject it because you're afraid to. Who else knew you were going to drive to Navigli, she said. Nobody. I didn't plan it. I just drove. Who knew your vehicle's location at that hour? He paused, then slowly. Anyone with access to the vehicle's tracking system. Who has access to your vehicle's tracking system? His jaw tightened. My assistant, my security lead, and... He stopped. And? He looked at her. And whoever has been inside my phone. She sat forward very slightly. Show me your phone, she said. He pulled it out and set it on the table between them. She picked it up. She was not a forensic analyst, but she knew enough. She had learned enough over the past 14 months, out of pure necessity, to know what to look for at the surface level. She went to the settings. Battery usage. Location services. Background processes. There was an application running in the background that had no icon on the home screen. It was labeled with a string of letters and numbers that looked like a system process. It had been active for 6 months. It was consuming a small, consistent amount of data and location access on a 20-minute refresh cycle. She looked at it for a long moment. Someone put tracking software on your phone, she said. Lorenzo leaned forward and looked at the screen. 6 months, he said, Mom, at minimum. This has been running for 6 months. She set the phone face down on the table. Whoever placed this had access to your movements, your calls, your messages. She paused. And they knew exactly where your car was Wednesday morning. And they made a call to Ferraro's line from 2 blocks away, he said slowly, while I was parked nearby. To make it look like you were the source, she said. Yes. They looked at each other across the table. Who put it there? She asked. He thought for a moment. His expression moved through several states in quick succession. The professional calculation she recognized, the personal anger underneath it, and then something that settled into a cold, focused clarity. Viviana had access to my phone for 8 months, he said flatly. Saraphina sat back. Of course. Of course she had. 8 months of access, 8 months of proximity. Planting a tracking application was a 10-second task for someone who knew what they were doing, and Viviana had been, as everything about her now indicated, someone who very much knew what she was doing. She didn't just plant herself, Saraphina said. She planted insurance, in case she needed to redirect suspicion. She couldn't have known how you were going to move, he said. She couldn't have planned for the documentation you built. But she had contingencies. If she got burned, she could burn someone else in the process. She almost burned you, Saraphina said. She almost burned us, he said. The word us again. Floating there, doing its complicated work. She called Fenu at 7 p.m. and told him about the tracking software. He took down the application identifier string, put it on with his technical team, and called back in 22 minutes to confirm it was a commercial-grade surveillance tool used primarily by private intelligence contractors. The same category of contractor that Ferraro's network was known to employ for operational security work. This actually helps your husband, Fenu said. I know. If Viviana's people planted his phone and used his location to stage a call to our target line, that explains the proximity data. It doesn't exonerate him on the photograph he took of your files. That's still a problem for you two personally. But it removes him from the line of suspicion on the Ferraro contact. Yes, she said. I'll need the phone. I'll have him bring it in tomorrow morning. Saraphina. Fenu's voice shifted slightly. This is going to be over in the next 72 hours. Viviana's in custody. Ferraro is pulling back on every front we can see. The case is solid. You should take a breath when this is finished. I will, she said. She hung up and told Lorenzo that Fenu needed his phone in the morning. He nodded. He had been quiet during her call, sitting with his hands on his knees, not trying to fill the room. Then he said, I need to ask you something. What? The document you sent to the press room. The one that broke the conference open. He paused. You didn't include that in what you showed me Tuesday night. No. You held it back. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Because you didn't trust me completely. No, she said. Because I don't trust anyone completely with everything. Not in a situation like this one. It has nothing to do with you specifically. It has something to do with me specifically. She looked at him. Yes, some of it does. He nodded. Not wounded, not defensive, just absorbing it. That instinct kept the whole operation intact, he said. If you'd included that document in what you showed me, and whoever got into your index files had communicated that upward, Ferraro would have known the full scope and moved before Friday, she said. Yes, I know. You saved it. I kept one card, she said. I always keep one card. He looked at her across the table and she saw something in his face that she had not seen in a very long time. Not admiration exactly, though that was part of it. Something more like the specific recognition of a person who has been looking at something without seeing it for years, and has finally, fully seen it. It made her angrier than almost anything else that had happened this week, because it was too late for that look to be easy to receive. Lorenzo, she said, go home. Go to the estate. I'll call you tomorrow about the Fenu meeting. Saraphina, not tonight. Her voice was steady and final. I have been running on 4 hours of sleep for 5 days. I have managed a 14-month private investigation, a corporate restructuring, a press conference, and a police coordination operation. And I found out today that my husband may or may not have done something that could have destroyed everything I built. And it turned out he didn't, but I had to sit with the possibility that he did for 8 hours while still executing the plan. She paused. I need to be alone tonight. That's not drama. It's just true. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He walked toward the door. At the door, he stopped. I know this isn't the moment for it, he said, without turning around. But I need you to know that I understand what I cost you. Not just this week, the years of it. I understand it, and I can't undo it, and I'm not going to spend the next conversation trying to trade understanding for forgiveness. He paused. I just needed to say that once, clearly. So it's said. He left. Seraphina sat in the empty room with the blank screens and the cold air and the sound of the city 9 floors below, and she stayed very still for a long time. Saturday arrived like a bill coming due. Viviana Marchetti was formally charged at 9 a.m. The charges included financial conspiracy, fraud, and operating as an unregistered agent of a foreign criminal organization. Her attorneys appeared outside the detention facility at 11 and read a statement that said she was cooperating fully with authorities, which Saraphina and Fenu both understood to mean she was already trading information about Ferraro in exchange for considerations on her own sentence, which meant Ferraro would know, by noon on Saturday at the latest, that his primary operative was now a liability pointed directly at him. Saraphina was at her meeting with Martina Caldesi when Julia texted her the news about the cooperation announcement. She read it under the table, nodded slightly, and returned her attention to Caldesi. Martina Caldesi was 61 years old, had the kind of face that people described as handsome rather than beautiful, and operated with the unhurried precision of someone who had been lied to by more powerful people than Saraphina could count, and had learned to listen for what wasn't being said. She had read the document, the full 47 pages plus the communication intercept. She had read all of it the night before, and she came to this meeting with her own notes, handwritten, which Saraphina found she respected, and began not with questions, but with a statement. "This is the most comprehensive private investigation I have seen in my career," Caldesi said, "and I have seen some good ones." "Thank you," Saraphina said. "I want to run it, all of it, not just the Viviana story, the Ferraro network story, the infiltration methodology, the timeline." Caldesi looked at her across the small cafe table. "I want to tell the real story, which is not about a wife who survived an affair. It's about a woman who single-handedly built the case that broke a 6-year criminal conspiracy that 3 official investigations failed to crack." Saraphina wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I don't want to be the story," she said. "You are the story," Caldesi said, not unkindly. "That's different from wanting to be it." A silence. "There are things I'll need to protect," Saraphina said. "My children, certain sources, certain methodologies, of course. And the business angle needs to be coordinated with our legal team before publication. Timing matters." "I'd expect nothing less." Caldesi looked at her steadily. "I want to ask you something personal." "Go ahead." "Your husband." She said it simply, without implication or agenda. "What's his role in how you tell this?" Saraphina was quiet for a moment. "He was the target of the operation," she said. "He was manipulated. He made choices that made him more vulnerable to that manipulation than he should have been." She paused. "The choices he made personally, in his marriage, those are private. I won't tell that part. Even though it's the engine of the story is Ferraro's network and how it operates, not my marriage." Caldesi studied her for a moment. "All right," she said. Then, "Do you think your husband knows how lucky he is?" Saraphina smiled, just slightly. "I think he's starting to." The call from Fenu came at 3:15 Saturday afternoon, and it was not the call she had been expecting. She had been expecting the call that said, "Ferraro's people are in full retreat. The case is being assembled. This is over." The call that closes something. Instead, Fenu said, "We have a problem." Her stomach dropped with the specific, trained efficiency of a woman who had learned to listen for that phrase and respond to it before the next sentence arrived. "Tell me," she said. "Ferraro moved last night. We believe he left Italian territory sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. His property in Como is empty. 3 of his known associates have gone dark. We're working with Europol on locating him, but as of right now..." Fenu paused. "He's not where we need him to be." "He ran," she said. "He ran." She pressed her free hand flat against the desk. "The case?" "Still solid for prosecution. We have enough to issue an international warrant by Monday. He'll be caught. But the immediate..." He paused again. "The immediate concern is that a man like Ferraro, when he runs, does not leave without insurance." "What kind of insurance?" "We don't know yet. It could be nothing. It could be that he simply removed himself to a safe jurisdiction and is going to fight extradition for 5 years." A pause. "Or it could be that he left something in motion before he left. An action. A contingency." "Against whom?" Against you, Fenu said. Specifically against you. Because you're the one who actually broke him, and men like Damiano Ferraro do not leave that unanswered. She sat very still. How credible is the threat assessment, she said. Credible enough that I want to assign you a protection detail starting tonight. And I want you to contact your children's school and make sure the security measures are still in place. They are, she said immediately. Good. Don't go back to the estate tonight. Don't go to the Conti Street apartment. That location is compromised. Is there somewhere else you can be? She thought for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, she said. Text me the address. My people will be there within the hour. She hung up. She sat in the silence of her office and felt, for the first time in this entire week, the specific flavor of fear that was not about losing. She had faced losing, had sat with it, had managed it. This was the fear that was about her children. That was the only fear that didn't have a rational overlay. That went through every layer of organization and strategy and composure and landed somewhere much older and much more essential. She called the school. The security lead confirmed both children were on campus, secure, accounted for. She spoke briefly to Elisa, who was between classes, and cheerful in the way 12-year-olds are cheerful when they don't know the shape of what's happening, and that cheerfulness was the most difficult sound Saraphina had heard all week. Then she called Lorenzo. He answered on the first ring. Ferraro ran, she said. A beat. When? Last night. Fenu thinks he may have left a contingency, a threat response. She kept her voice even. The children are secure. Fenu is sending protection. Where are you? Still at the office. I'm coming. Lorenzo? I'm coming, he said again, and his voice had the particular quality of a man who is not asking permission and is not open to discussion on this specific point. Where do you need to be tonight? She thought about it for a moment, thought about the Conti Street apartment, compromised, about the estate, too visible, too associated, about the places Ferraro's people would look first. There's a house in Bellagio, she said. My sister's. Ferraro's network has no connection to it. It's not associated with my name or my family's finances. Bellagio, he said. 2 hours. Lorenzo, she paused. I'm not. Tonight isn't a reconciliation. I need somewhere safe, and I need to not be alone in it. And you're the person I trust most to be in a room where something might happen. A brief silence. I know, he said. I'm not coming for reconciliation. I'm coming because you're in danger, and you're the mother of my children, and you're... He stopped. I'm coming. I'll meet you at the parking structure on Via Torino in 40 minutes. He hung up before she could respond. She looked at her phone. Then she stood up, put on her coat, told Julia to go home and not come back until Monday, and picked up the one bag she kept in her office closet that was always packed. 3 days of clothing, the encrypted device, her personal documents, the things she had learned to keep ready the way people who live in earthquake zones keep ready, and walked out. The drive to Bellagio took 2 hours and 14 minutes. Lorenzo drove. She sat in the passenger seat for the first time in years, which was strange. She had stopped being a passenger in the way of someone who was comfortable relinquishing control to another person, and the physical reality of it, his hands on the wheel, the particular way he navigated at speed, reminded her body of something her mind had been busy overriding for days. They didn't speak much in the car, not out of hostility, out of the particular exhaustion of people who have used most of their words and need a rest from the sound of their own situation. Somewhere on the highway north of the city, he turned on the radio quietly. An old station, the kind that played Italian songs from 30 years ago, and she recognized a particular song that had been playing in a restaurant on the night they had gotten engaged, which was either coincidence or the universe being gratuitously dramatic, and she looked out the window at the dark and said nothing. His hand moved on the gear shift, and she noticed, without intending to, that it was 3 inches from her knee. She looked out the window. Her sister's house sat above the lake on the eastern shore, with the water visible from every window and the particular stillness of a place that had never been touched by the part of her life that had been loudest. Marta had met them at the door. Saraphina had called ahead, and had done the things Saraphina's older sister had always done in crises, which was produce food and ask no questions, which was either the most respectful or the most Italian response possible, and was probably both. She fed them, left them, and went to bed with the tact of someone who understood that whatever needed to happen in her house tonight was not her business. They sat at the kitchen table after midnight with the remains of a meal between them and the lake outside the window, black and still and absolute. Lorenzo looked at his hands on the table. "Tell me what you need," he said. Not the business version of the question, from Tuesday night. Something different, quieter. She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. He nodded. "I know that's not what you were hoping to hear," she said. "It's the truth," he said. "I'll take the truth." He paused. "I've been thinking about what you said, that I didn't lose you because of one affair, that it was the years before." "Lorenzo, I'm not going to argue it. I'm agreeing with it." He looked up at her. "I took you for granted in the most specific way possible, which is that I knew you were extraordinary and I stopped responding to it, like it was just ambient, like a light you forget to notice because it's always on." His voice was rough, not performed, just rough. "I want to tell you that I see it now, but I know that you've heard things like that, and I know that knowing and changing are different things, and I know you need me to prove it over time, not tonight, over time." She looked at him. She thought about 21 years. The apartment in the early days with the dining room table covered in documents. Matteo's birth, which had been complicated and frightening, and Lorenzo sitting beside her for 17 hours straight without complaint or impatience. The foundation she had built, the years he had stopped seeing her, the selfie on a Tuesday morning, the 47 pages, the cold glass of a window in October. "I'm very tired," she said. "I know. I don't know what I want yet, about us. I know that too. I need you to be patient with not knowing." He held her gaze. "Yes," he said, simply, without negotiation. She nodded. They sat at the table for a while longer with the lake outside and the house quiet around them and the complicated, specific wreckage of a long marriage between them. Not destroyed, not intact, but somewhere in the difficult space between those things that doesn't have a clean name. Then her phone lit up on the table. It was a text from Fenu's number, and it said 4 words. Ferraro just made contact. She picked up the phone and read the full message that followed, and felt something she hadn't felt in days. Something sharpening behind her sternum with a clarity that was almost physical. She looked up at Lorenzo. "He didn't run," she said. "He was positioning. He wants to negotiate." Lorenzo's face went still with that controlled cold settling she recognized. "What does he want?" She read the message a second time, making sure she had understood it correctly, because what Ferraro was proposing was not what she had expected from a man in his position, and unexpected things needed to be read twice. "He wants to meet," she said. "In person, tomorrow morning. He says he has information about who inside the Bellicourt organization has been feeding data to his network for the past 3 years. She paused. "Not Viviana. Someone else. Someone who is still inside." Lorenzo said nothing. "He says if we meet, he'll give us the name," she said, "in exchange for our withdrawal of cooperation with Fenu's prosecution." The silence in the kitchen was complete and total. "He's bluffing," Lorenzo said. "Maybe," she said. "Or he has someone we haven't found and he's desperate enough to trade the name for survival." "Yes. If there's someone inside we haven't identified." He stopped. His jaw tightened. "Everything we've protected could still be vulnerable." She set the phone down. The lake outside the window was black and absolute and gave nothing back. "If we meet him," she said slowly, "we hand Fenu the location in advance and we let the police take him when he arrives. We don't negotiate. We use the meeting as the trap. And if he anticipates that, then we don't get the name and we proceed with the prosecution as it stands and hope there's no one left inside we haven't identified. And if there is someone left inside?" She looked at him. The question sat between them like a third person at the table, and it didn't have a clean answer, and they both knew it, and the knowing of it was the thing that made the next decision. Not strategic, but something more essential than that. A choice between safety and truth, between protecting what they had built and knowing, completely, what had been done to it. Lorenzo looked at her across the table with the remains of the meal between them and the lake outside and the weight of 21 years and the specific, irrevocable moment of a decision that would close something no matter which direction it went. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She picked up her phone. She pulled up Fenu's number, and before she pressed call, she looked at Lorenzo one more time, at the face she had known for more than half her life, marked now by everything the last week had cost both of them. And she understood, with the particular clarity that comes only when you are very tired and very honest, and there is a lake outside the window, and nowhere left to hide from the truth of anything, that the decision she was about to make was not just about Ferraro. It was about whether she was the kind of person who chose safety over the whole truth, and she had known the answer to that question for a very long time. She pressed call. "Commissario," she said when Fenu answered. "He wants to meet. Here is what we're going to do." Fenu listened without interrupting, which was how she knew he understood the gravity of what she was proposing. When she finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. Then, "You understand that using a civilian meeting as an operational trap carries significant risk. If Ferraro suspects the setup, he won't come armed," she said. "He's not that kind of man. His violence is always institutional, delegated. He'll come with lawyers, not guns." "You're certain of that?" "I'm certain enough." She paused. "Commissario, if there is someone still inside the Bellicourt organization feeding his network, I need that name. Everything I've built for 14 months can still be undermined from the inside if I don't know who it is. I cannot protect what I've built on an incomplete picture." Another silence. "Where does he want to meet?" Fenu asked. "He didn't specify a location. He wants a response first. Confirmation that will come." "Send the confirmation. Tell him you'll meet at a location of your choosing. I want somewhere public, Lake Como region, since you're already there, with natural sightlines and enough foot traffic that my people can be in position without standing out." A pause. "And Saraphina, you don't actually meet him. You're not in that room." "I need to be there." "You're the primary threat target. You're not Commissario." Her voice was quiet and absolute. "I have spent 14 months building a case that your division couldn't crack in 6 years. I identified the operative, mapped the financial network, documented the methodology, and handed you a prosecution package that your own attorneys described as airtight. I am the reason this case exists." She paused. "I will be in that room." A very long silence. "Lorenzo Bellicourt will be with you," Fenu said finally. It was not a question. "Yes. My people will be in position before you arrive. You will wear a device. You will not attempt to physically detain anyone. You will not make any promises or agreements regarding the prosecution. You are there to receive information only." "Understood. If anything feels wrong before you enter, you walk away and call me. No heroism." "I'm not interested in heroism," she said. "I'm interested in the name." She ended the call and looked at Lorenzo across the table. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "There's a cafe on the waterfront in Verona. I've been there before. Open layout, lake view, tourist foot traffic, even in October." He nodded slowly. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure I need to know who's still inside." She set her phone face down on the table. "I'm not sure about much else right now, but that, yes." He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "Okay. Just that. Okay." The same word he had used when she had given him an assignment in her study 5 days ago. And it meant the same thing it had meant then. Not cheerful agreement, but the specific commitment of a man who has decided to follow someone else's lead without reservation. She nodded. They cleared the table together, which they had not done, she realized, the thought arriving with unexpected sharpness, in years. The domestic simplicity of it, the plates and the glasses, his hands and hers in the same small space, was almost too ordinary to look at directly. She went to bed in her sister's spare room and stared at the ceiling for 40 minutes, and then she slept. Verona in October was beautiful. The way places are beautiful when they don't know you're in trouble. The lake was silver gray in the morning light, flat and wide and indifferent, and the cafe Saraphina had chosen sat at the edge of the waterfront promenade with the kind of open terrace that made concealment easy for people who knew what they were doing and difficult for people who didn't. Fenu's people were there before them. She couldn't identify all of them, which was the point. 2 men at separate tables reading separate newspapers. A woman at the bar ordering something she didn't intend to drink. A figure at the far end of the promenade who looked like a tourist and moved like a former soldier. She clocked all of them within 90 seconds of arriving. Old habit. She and Lorenzo sat at the table she had requested, facing the water, and ordered coffee they wouldn't taste, and waited. Ferraro arrived at 9:03. I was shorter than she had expected, which was always the thing about powerful men. The reality of them was smaller than the space they occupied in your imagination. He was perhaps 60, heavy through the shoulders in the way of men who had been physically strong in their youth and had kept the frame, if not the condition, with a face that had the specific quality of someone who had spent decades making calculations and had gotten very good at keeping those calculations off his expression. He came alone, which surprised her. No lawyers, no handlers, just a man in a coat walking toward them across a lakefront terrace on a gray October morning. He sat down across from them. He looked at Saraphina first, not at Lorenzo, at her. "You're smaller than I expected," he said. His Italian was northern, clipped, the accent of someone who had grown up in the same valleys Lorenzo had. "I get that," she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. "You cost me a great deal." "You cost yourself a great deal," she said. "I just documented it." He looked at Lorenzo then. Some complicated communication passed between the two men, the kind that happens between people who have operated in overlapping worlds for years, who know each other's names and reputations and histories without ever having been formally introduced. "I have something you want," Ferraro said to Lorenzo. "So I understand," Lorenzo said. "Your organization has been compromised at the board level for 3 years, not operational, board level." Ferraro placed both hands flat on the table. They were large hands, steady, the hands of a man who was not nervous. "One of your directors has been providing quarterly strategic briefings to my network. Financial projections, acquisition targets, internal disputes, everything that would allow a competing interest to anticipate your moves before you made them." Lorenzo's expression did not change. Saraphina felt him go very still beside her, the same stillness she had noticed across the study table 5 days ago, and she felt her own body do its trained, deliberate settling into complete control. "Who?" Lorenzo said. Ferraro looked at him for a moment, then, "Marco Selvi." The name landed in the air between them like a physical thing. Marco Selvi, Lorenzo's longest-tenured board director, a man he had known for 18 years, a man who had been present at the founding of the Castellano Cultural Foundation, who had given a toast at Matteo's christening, who sat in the second chair on the left at every board meeting and had the specific comfortable authority of someone who had never once been questioned. Saraphina felt Lorenzo's hand under the table close into a fist against his thigh. "That's a serious accusation," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "I have documentation," Ferraro said. 8 quarterly briefings, meeting records, payment records through a Cyprus entity. He reached into his coat and produced a folded envelope, which he placed on the table without pushing it forward. "In exchange for this, I want your attorney to file a statement with Fenu's division withdrawing your cooperation with the prosecution case against my organization." "That's not possible," she said. Nothing is ever entirely—" "No," she said. "I mean it literally. It is not legally possible for us to withdraw cooperation with an active prosecution without ourselves becoming subjects of investigation for obstruction. Even if we wanted to do that, which we don't, we cannot do it without destroying ourselves in the process." She looked at him steadily. "If that's what you were told was possible, someone gave you incorrect legal advice." Ferraro looked at her. She watched him process this, watched him recalibrate in real time, the slight shift behind his eyes, the almost imperceptible adjustment of his posture. "What can you offer me?" he said finally. "Nothing," she said. "I have no authority to negotiate on behalf of a criminal prosecution. I'm a private citizen." She paused. "What I can offer you is this. If the documentation in that envelope is real, and if Marco Selvi's activities can be independently verified, Commissario Fenu's office will learn of it through proper channels. And however that affects the scope and direction of the existing investigation is between you and your attorneys and the court." "That's not an offer. That's nothing. That's the truth of your situation," she said, "which is worth more than a false promise." A silence. The lake moved gently against the promenade wall. A tourist couple walked past the terrace with a small dog on a leash. One of Fenu's people turned a page of his newspaper. Ferraro looked at the envelope on the table. Then he looked at Saraphina. "You know what I find remarkable about you," he said. Not angrily, almost with a kind of professional assessment. "I don't need to know." "I'll tell you anyway." He leaned back slightly. "I have been doing this for 30 years. I have dealt with police, prosecutors, competing organizations, politicians, judges. I have never had my operation dismantled by a private individual with no institutional authority and no formal power of any kind." He paused. "You did this from a private office with a laptop and a very good instinct for patterns. That's—" He stopped. "That's genuinely unusual." "I had time," she said. "You gave me time because you underestimated me. Most people did." He nodded slowly. "Yes, that was our mistake." "It was," she agreed. He stood up. He left the envelope on the table. He put on his coat with the unhurried movements of a man who has already accepted the shape of what is happening and is simply moving through it with whatever dignity remains. At the edge of the terrace, Fenu's people moved. They were professional and quiet about it. No drama, no shouting, just four people converging on a man who had already stopped walking, who stood at the threshold of the terrace with his hands visible and his posture resigned because he had known, she understood now, that this was a possibility when he came. He had come anyway. She didn't know if that was arrogance or something closer to exhaustion, and she found she didn't particularly need to know. She watched him be led away with the particular stillness she reserved for things that were finished. Lorenzo picked up the envelope. She put her hand on top of his. "Not here," she said quietly. "We give it to Fenu unopened. We don't touch the chain of evidence." He looked at her. Then he set it back down. "Selfie," he said. His voice was very controlled. 18 years. I know. He was at our wedding. I know, Lorenzo." He pressed his mouth into a line and looked at the lake, and she watched him do the work of absorbing a betrayal that had nothing to do with his marriage and everything to do with the specific loneliness of discovering that a person you trusted had been a stranger all along. She understood that feeling better than most people she knew. She said nothing. She let him sit with it. After a while, Fenu appeared at the edge of the terrace and walked toward them, and the morning moved forward in the way that mornings do after terrible things, not gently, but persistently, which is the closest thing to mercy that time offers. Marco Selvi was arrested on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks later, at his home outside Milan. Fina was not there to see it. She was in Bellagio, at her sister's house, where she had been for most of those 3 weeks, with her children. She had brought them up from school the weekend after Verena, and they had been living in the particular suspended time of a family that is reorganizing itself without yet knowing the final shape. Matteo had arrived and immediately done what she had expected him to do, which was assess the situation and then find something useful to occupy himself with, helping Marta in the garden, asking practical questions about the property, processing his emotions through action the way he always had. He was so much like her that she found it both comforting and slightly heartbreaking. Elisa had arrived and cried. Not dramatically. Elisa's tears were always focused and brief and followed immediately by a return to practicality. But she had curled against Saraphina's side on the first evening and said, "Are you going to be okay?" "Yes," Saraphina had said. "Both of you?" A pause. "I think so. It's going to take time." Elisa had nodded, processing this, and then said, "Is Papa coming?" "On weekends," Saraphina had said. "For now." "For now," Elisa had repeated, with the particular precision of a 12-year-old who knows when she is being given partial information and has decided to accept it for the moment. Lorenzo came on the first weekend and on the second. He stayed in the village at a hotel with a view of the lake, and he came to the house each day and sat with the children and made no demands on Saraphina and observed the limits she had established without pushing against them. He brought Elisa a book she had mentioned wanting. He spent 4 hours with Matteo repairing a stone wall in Marta's garden that had needed attention for a year. He cooked dinner on Sunday evening of the second weekends. Really cooked it, from scratch. Badly in some places, better in others, with the effortful sincerity of a man who was trying to show something through his hands because words had run low. Saraphina watched all of this from various distances. She was not ready. She did not pretend to be. But she was watching. And watching was something. The Selvi arrest was the last piece. Fenu called her with confirmation, and she received it sitting at the table by the window with her coffee, and she said, "Thank you, Commissario, for everything." And he said, "No, thank you, genuinely." And she believed him, and they ended the call with the specific cleanness of a professional relationship that has completed its purpose. She sat with the coffee, and looked at the lake. It was done. Viviana was in custody and cooperating. Ferraro was in custody and not cooperating, which didn't matter because Saraphina's documentation was sufficient without him. Selvi's arrest completed the internal picture and removed the last active vulnerability in the Bellicore organization's board structure. The Castellano holdings were intact. The foundation was intact. The financial forensics firm's audit had found no additional breach beyond what she had already documented. She had built something and it had held. She let herself feel that for a few minutes. Not triumphantly, but honestly. The way you feel something you've worked for when you're alone and there's no performance required of you. She had done an extraordinary thing, mostly in secret, mostly alone, mostly at a cost that no balance sheet would ever fully capture. Then she set down her coffee and opened her laptop and began drafting the proposal she had been thinking about for 3 years, the one she had mentioned to Lorenzo once and had never mentioned again after he had failed to listen. A creative and cultural consultancy operating independently of the Bellicore name under her own, with the first client already in mind and the structural framework already fully formed in her head from years of waiting for the right moment. She wrote for 2 hours and it came out clean and certain, the way things do when you have been thinking about them for long enough that the thinking is finished before the writing begins. Lorenzo came on the 3rd weekend with no announcement. He drove up Saturday morning and arrived at the house and found her alone in the garden, because Marta had taken the children into the village and the morning was clear, and she had been sitting with her documentation for the consultancy proposal, which now ran to 15 pages and had a name. He came through the garden gate and stopped when he saw her. She looked up at him. He looked, she thought, like someone who had been doing significant interior work in the weeks since Verena. There was something different in how he held himself, not diminished, which she would not have respected, but less defended, less managed. Like a man who had stopped spending energy on the performance of being fine and had redirected it somewhere that required more honesty. "You're not in Milan," she said. "No, I wanted to see the kids." He paused. "And you, if this is a good time." "Sit down, Lorenzo." He sat in the other chair, the one that had been empty all morning, and looked at what she was working on. "What is that?" She turned the laptop toward him. He read the title page. She watched his face as he read it. The consultancy name, her name, the framework outline. "You're starting it," he said. "Yes." "The studio you—" He stopped. "The thing you mentioned that night, years ago." "Yes." He looked at the screen for a long moment, then he looked at her. "I should have listened, that night." "Yes," she said. "You should have." He held her gaze. "I know." She looked at him across the small table in her sister's garden, with the lake visible below, and the October sun making everything flat and clear and unforgiving. "I want to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear it without trying to fix it. Okay? I loved you completely," she said. "I want you to know that. I didn't do what I did these past 14 months because I stopped loving you. I did it because I had to keep building even when you stopped seeing what I was building. I kept going because that's who I am, not because I'd given up on us." She paused. "But I also need you to understand that who I am is not compatible with being invisible. If we do this, whatever we decide about us, I'm not going to make myself smaller to fit a space you defined. Not again." He was very still. "I know," he said. "I need more than knowing this time." "I know that too." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, looking at his hands and then back at her. "I've been seeing someone. A professional. A therapist." He said the word with the slight difficulty of a man for whom that admission cost something, which was honest. 3 times a week for the past 3 weeks. I'm not telling you that to get credit. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what I'm actually doing, not what I'm planning to do." She looked at him. 3 times a week, she said. "Yes." "Since when exactly?" "The Monday after Verena. The Monday after Ferraro was arrested." He paused. "The Monday after I watched you call Fenu from my sister's kitchen table and tell him exactly what we were going to do and realized that I had spent 8 months letting a woman I was sleeping with nearly destroy the person who has been the most important person in my life for 21 years, and that I did it because I was complacent and selfish and had stopped being brave enough to keep working at something that required real work." He said all of this with the directness that was his defining quality, undeflected, taking all of it, and that whatever happens between us, I needed to understand how I got there so that I never get there again. For my own sake. Not just for yours. She looked at him for a long time. The garden was quiet. The lake moved somewhere below them. She could hear faintly the sound of the village, movement, voices, the ordinary texture of a morning that had no knowledge of any of this. I'm not ready to come home, she said. I know. I need more time up here. The children are settled. I'm working. I need the pace to be slower for a while before I can think clearly about what I want. How long? I don't know. She held his gaze. Can you live with not knowing? He looked at her. Then, yes. I need to believe that. I know you do. He sat back. Tell me how. She thought about it. The real answer, not the careful one. Call me, she said. Not about business, not about the children, that's separate. Call me the way you used to. When you used to call from Frankfurt at midnight because you'd seen something that made you think of me and you couldn't wait until morning to say it. She paused. I know that was 20 years ago. I know people stopped doing that, but I need to know whether there's still a person underneath everything who wants to do that, not a husband managing a marriage. The person. He was quiet. I'll call tonight, he said. Don't call tonight to prove a point. I'm not going to call to prove a point, he said quietly. I'm going to call because I've wanted to call you every night for 3 weeks, and I kept stopping myself because I didn't know if I had earned it yet. He looked at the lake, then at her. I haven't earned it, but I'd like to try. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned her laptop back toward herself and looked at the proposal with her name on it, and the consultancy that was going to exist regardless of anything else that happened, and she felt the shape of the future. Not clear, not easy, but real, hers, built on nothing that could be taken from her because she had built it herself. Stay for dinner, she said. The kids will want to see you. He nodded. He did not push for more than that, which was the right thing. Can I ask what you're going to call it? He said, nodding at the laptop. The consultancy. She looked at the name on the page. Conti Creative, she said. Her family name. The one she had never legally changed. He looked at the screen, then at her. He didn't say anything, but his face did something quiet and complicated that she understood without needing to name. She turned back to her work. He sat beside her in the October garden, not too close, not trying to fix anything, just present in the specific way of someone who has decided that presence is the only honest offering they have, and she let him be there, and the morning moved around them both the way mornings do. Without sentiment, without forgiveness, but also without stopping. 6 months later, on a Saturday evening in late April, Lorenzo Bellicore stood in the small chapel in Palermo, where they had been married 22 years earlier, in front of 40 people who had known them long enough to understand the weight of what they were witnessing, and he spoke without notes. He did not describe Saraphina as his partner, or his rock, or the wind beneath anything. He did not use the language of romantic occasion. He spoke plainly, with the directness that was his best quality when he chose to turn it toward honesty rather than management. He said that he had spent years living beside someone extraordinary and treating that extraordinariness as ambient, as something he could rely on without tending to. He said that what she had built, alone, in secret, over 14 months while he was failing her, was the most impressive thing he had ever watched a person do, not because of its scale, but because of its discipline, because of the specific kind of strength it takes to keep building in a direction no one can see. For a future you're not certain you still want, while the person who was supposed to be beside you is somewhere else entirely. He said he was not asking for credit for changing. He was asking for the chance to show it over time, which was a different thing, and he understood the difference now. He said she was the architect of everything that mattered in his life, and he should have said so every day for 22 years, and he intended to say it every day for however many years they had left, not because it would balance anything out, but because it was true, and truth was the only place he knew how to start from now. Saraphina stood beside him in a dress that was not white. It was the particular deep blue of the lake in October, the color of a morning when you make a decision that cannot be unmade. And she listened to him with her hands still and her face composed in the way that people who knew her recognized as the deepest form of attention she was capable of. When he finished, she did not make a speech. She had told him in advance that she wouldn't, and she had not told him why. And the reason was simple. She had spent the past 6 months being articulate about every hard thing, naming every hurt, documenting every cost, and what she wanted from this afternoon was not more words but the specific physical reality of a choice. She took his hand. That was all. She took his hand in both of hers and held it in the way you hold something you have nearly lost and have decided, with full knowledge of the cost, to carry forward. Elisa, in the second row, cried the way she always cried, briefly, specifically, and then immediately composed herself and looked around to see who else was crying, because she was 12, and social calibration never fully switched off. Matteo did not cry. He sat with his hands on his knees and watched his parents with the grave attention of a young man trying to understand what love looks like when it is not a beginning but a continuation. And she could see him working at the understanding, filing it somewhere, and she thought, he will be extraordinary, this one. He already is. Her sister Marta sat beside their elderly mother, who had not been told the full story and did not need to be, and held the old woman's hand, and the afternoon light came through the chapel windows the way Italian light does in April, warm and specific, and completely indifferent to the significance of what it was illuminating, which was, she had always thought, light's most honest quality. The Conti Creative Consultancy opened its doors on a Monday morning in March, in an office space that Saraphina had chosen herself in a neighborhood that had no association with the Bellicourt name, on a street where the windows faced east and the morning light was good. Julia came with her, which had been Julia's decision. She had resigned from the Bellicourt group and called Saraphina the following morning and said, "I want to work for the actual operation, if that's acceptable." Saraphina had said, "I can't pay you what you were making there yet." Julia had said, "I know, that's fine." 3 clients came in the first month through the Cultural Foundation network that Saraphina had spent years quietly building, and which now turned out to be, in a development that surprised no one who had watched her work, an extraordinarily effective professional referral system. She worked long hours, which was not new, but they felt different now. Chosen, shaped by her own decisions, rather than by the structure of someone else's empire. She worked at her own pace, on her own terms, on her own problems. And the exhaustion she felt at the end of each day was the satisfying kind. The kind that comes from building, rather than from holding things together that want to come apart. Lorenzo called, as he had promised. Not every night. That would have been a performance, and she had told him she didn't need performance. But often. 3 or 4 times a week, in the evenings, from wherever he happened to be, about things that had nothing to do with strategy or business, or the managed business of repairing a marriage. He called to say he had eaten at a restaurant they had gone to years ago, and the ricotta was still exactly as good. He called to say Matteo had said something at dinner that had made him laugh harder than he had laughed in months, and he had wanted to tell her immediately. He called to say he was sitting in a hotel in Frankfurt at midnight, looking at the city lights and thinking about her. She answered when she was able, and when she wasn't, she called back. And the conversations were not always long and were not always easy, and were sometimes halting in the way of 2 people finding the frequency of each other again after years of static. But they were real. That was the thing. They were consistently, specifically real. And on a Saturday in November, 8 months after everything, sitting at the small desk in her office with the east-facing windows and the good morning light, she opened a document she had not opened in months. Not the 47 pages, those were filed and finished and belonged to a different chapter, but a personal document, a few pages, in which she had been keeping notes about what she wanted. Not what the situation required, what she, Saraphina Bellicourt Conti, actually wanted for the remaining decades of her life. She read through it. Then she added 3 lines at the bottom. The first line said, "The consultancy is working. It is what I hoped it would be." The second line said, "The children are okay. More than okay. They are paying attention to all of this, and they are going to be fine." The third line said, "I think I want to go home." She looked at that line for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Lorenzo. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said. Just that. His voice, quiet and present. "Hey," she said. A small silence, comfortable in the specific way that silences become comfortable when they are no longer filled with what cannot be said. "I've been thinking," she said. "About?" "Coming home." She paused. "Not yet. I want to finish the month up here, finish the Rossetti project, get the kids settled for the next term. But after that," she paused again, "I want to try." He was quiet for a moment, then, Okay. Not the way it was, she said. Everything we talked about. Equal, real, honest. Yes. I mean it, Lorenzo. I know you do. His voice was steady and low, and had in it the quality of a man who has spent 8 months earning the right to receive something and is receiving it now without taking more than what is offered. I know. She looked at the east-facing windows. The November light was thin and clear and honest, the kind of light that shows everything as it actually is, without softening. I'll call you tonight, she said. I'll answer, he said. She ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand and the document open on her screen and the sound of the city outside the window. Real, continuous, indifferent, alive. She had built something that held. She had protected what mattered. She had not made it easy or clean or painless for anyone, including herself, which was the only way anything real ever got done. She closed the document, opened the Rossetti file, and got back to work.